Hi, this is Mr. Evans. This video looks at a question on culture, specifically to what extent does national culture determine the organisational culture of a small business. You probably get most out of this video if you just take a minute to pause the video and write some bullet points, maybe how you would answer the question. Or go ahead and time yourself for 25 minutes and answer the question yourself. I've just picked out a couple of points from the examiner's report from 2017. The examiner reminds us that defining terms where it's not specifically asked for is using time which could be used more effectively to actually answer the question. Having said this, it's important to be very clear and precise about the aspects of the concepts which are being used. Right, the AQA in this newer specification, which first examined in 2017, they've slightly changed the marking scheme so that examiners are more able to award creative approaches to writing essays. AQA have been trying to get away from the formulaic approach to writing essays that occurred under the last specification. And one of the things that the mark scheme says is that examiners need to look at the whole response to the question before issuing a mark, whereas before you could kind of like break down and award marks for individual things like a definition. You definitely get 2 marks for a definition under the old specification. Now, AQA are not saying don't write a definition, but they're saying it might not be necessary, and particularly if the point of a definition is to show the examiner that you really understand the concept being used. Now, obviously, if you write a really great essay that's fully focused on the question, by implication, even if you haven't defined the term, you've clearly got an understanding of what that term is if you can produce a top-band essay on it. So whether or not you write a definition is up to you. The second thing the examiner says is that an effective line of analysis will often direct the argument back to the question itself, having fully explored the point being made. So importance of developing chains of analysis, lots of little steps in the argument, application to the context, and then link back to the question at the end of the point. And finally, a good judgment answers the question set, links logically to analysis, and planning responses is essential to achieve this. So this bit about planning responses, that word essential, the examiner is telling us, the chief examiner is saying that the best students always plan a good essay. Now, certainly I've been in exams in the past where I haven't planned my essay, and I start writing my essay and I'm not really focused on what I'm writing because I don't have a plan. I'm trying to think like what's coming next, what's going to be my next point, and that means that I'm not really focused on what I'm writing. It also means that I'm not sure where the essay is going, and if I have planned my essay and know what my conclusion is going to be, I can write my essay bearing in mind what I'm going to say in my conclusion, and linking back to what I said before about the examiner taking a holistic view of the essay, you're going to be able to write a much better holistic essay if you know what the conclusion is going to be when you start writing. So I can't emphasize enough the importance of planning an answer to a question. I do that for every question that I write. So without any further ado, let's have a look at how I have tried to answer this question. So I do time myself answering these questions. Obviously, I'm typing this up on the computer and I type much faster than I can write by hand, but this took me 21 minutes. It seems a little bit longer than maybe you'll be able to recreate in exam conditions, but hopefully looking at it is still useful because we can pick out some of those features that the chief examiner picked out. I can see I've put in twice here, but let's have a look at the essay. Organisational culture refers to the beliefs, values and norms of behaviour that are unique to the people who work for a company. The national culture of the country a small business is in is just one influence on the organisational culture of that business. So what have I done here? I have started with the definition in this case because I wanted to make it really clear what that I understand what organisational culture is, and then I've basically told the examiner my conclusion right here, which is that the national culture is just one influence on organisational cultures. So that's why I've chosen to do that. Again, maybe I could get rid of that. Maybe that's not 100% necessary, and hopefully my analysis should demonstrate an understanding of what culture is anyway. So anyway, here's the first analytical point. The national culture of the country and organisation is based in will affect the norms, beliefs and values of those employees who work for the organisation. As organisational culture is largely determined by the people in an organisation, their national culture will have a huge influence on the values that these employees hold and the behaviours they exhibit. So this is my first point. National culture determines the values that employees hold, the behaviours they exhibit. That's, and that's going to affect the organisational culture. For example, the power distance element of Hofstede's research into national cultures suggests that some countries have a higher tolerance for strict hierarchical structures and authoritarian managerial decision-making than others. Nigeria and Japan are examples of countries where there is a high power distance, and therefore the culture of a small business within these countries may be for management to make decisions and then tell the workforce. Whereas in countries like the US or UK, low power distant countries, small businesses may adopt a less authoritarian approach to decision making, a flatter structure, and a consultative approach on Tenenbaum and Schmidt's continuum may be more appropriate. So what have I done in this paragraph? Well, I've shown the examiner that I understand the importance of national culture and organisational culture. I've backed that up. I've developed the point by bringing in Hofstede. I've talked about one element on Hofstede's from Hofstede's research, and I've tried to link that to organisational culture in terms of the approach to decision making, structure, and so on. And I've also brought in Tenenbaum and Schmidt. So I've got a few theorists in there to help me develop my point, which is that organisational culture is an important influence. National culture is an important influence on organisational culture. Next paragraph, other aspects of Hofstede's research talk about the behaviours that will be valued in an organisation as an important determinant of culture. For example, in masculine societies, decisions tend to be made quickly with reference to data, whilst in feminine societies, an approach to decision-making that considers the views of employees may be more valued. Therefore, national cultures will play a large part in determining the organisational culture of a small business because they influence the norms and values of the society that business is operating in. This sentence here is absolutely key in my analysis because it's bringing together these previous points that I have made, and it's linked to the question, which is whether national cultures determine the organisational culture of a small business. And it's just summarising my point, really. It's a signpost to the examiner that I'm about to bring in some balance and look at the other side of the argument, as is this word, however. So, however, as the world has become more increasingly interconnected through the process of globalisation and migration between countries has increased, many societies are becoming internationalised, and it is likely that businesses may employ people from a variety of different national cultures. Therefore, cultures in small businesses are less determined by the national culture of the nation they're located in, but the norms and values that emerge as people interact with each other. Okay, so this looks at a counter-argument, which is that globalisation is making national cultures less important. The leader of a small business is also likely to play a large part in determining the organisational culture of a small business. Because the business is small, the leader is likely to play a big role in decision-making, which will influence the employees in a small business. Greiner's model of growth suggests that before the crisis of leadership occurs, the leader can play a large role in determining the behaviours, norms and values in the small business. So I've brought in Greiner's model of growth to kind of back up my point, that I'm answering the question in context, and the context is small businesses. Finally, the size, age and industry a company is in will play a large part in determining the culture. A small business started by highly qualified computer programmers in a highly tech industry will likely have a very different culture to an established small business in a traditional industry like a bakery with part-time staff. Tech graduates may look to employ more of a task culture, focused on completing small projects well, whereas the traditional business may have more of a role culture where people have set jobs within the bakery. So again, I've brought in another model here. These are Handy's different cultures, and I've tried to say how the industry an organisation is in may determine which one of Handy's cultures is emerges. So I've looked at, throughout this essay, I've looked at why national culture is important. My first counterpoint was that actually national culture is less important as we become more globalised. I've then talked about how the leader of a small business will be important. And finally, I've talked about how the industry a business in will also be important, and I've tried to link that to Handy's cultures. So it should be clear to the examiner that I have a pretty good understanding of organisational culture and the various other models that are included in the specification. So now I just need a conclusion to answer the question clearly. In conclusion, while national cultures play an important role in determining the organisational culture of a small business because of the impact on the society a business is located in, the influence of national culture is becoming less important over time. So this is my answer to the question. It's important, but it's becoming less important. This is because of the effect of globalisation and increased migration. There's my support for the answer. It is probable that a bigger influence on the culture of a small business will be its leader, because Greiner points out that a small business leader will, to a large part, be responsible for the decisions made and will have more power to influence the norms, values and behaviours of employees in the organisation. So what have I done with my conclusion? Well, I've said why organisational culture is important, but I have said why the leader will be a more important determinant of the culture of a small business, and hopefully what I've done by this final sentence here is made it really clear that I'm talking about small businesses, and so the answer to the question is very clearly in the context that the question was asked.